what I'll do too is I'll stop recordings after each portion, so that way people can follow along a little bit better on YouTube. They're not going to be, it's not going to be too much at once for them. All right, so now we are live on YouTube. All right, we are live, everyone. I'm Brother Doug with the Awakened by Yahuwah Fellowship Group and Yahuwah Almighty Yahushua Messiah. So today we are going to be doing continue our Torah reading here. I'll be starting us off. Okay, so I'm just going to have, let's see here. So let me just get it on the, let's see here, recording to the cloud. And okay, so, all right, okay, here we go. Now it's recording to the cloud. All right, so I'm going to be starting at Genesis 12, verse 1 and to 17:27. So I think what I'll do for everyone here is I'll put it on the shared screen here. Okay. All right, let me just see here. Let me go to shared screen. And I think I'll do, let's see here. Okay. All right. Get it here. I'll be reading from the Brenton's Septuagint. Okay. Here we go. Let's see here. And Yahuwah said to Abram, go forth out of your land and out of your kindred and out of the house of your father and come into the land which I will show you. And I will make you, sorry about that, guys. Sorry about that. Out of the land, out of your kindred and out of the house of your father, come into the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. I will barak you and magnify your name, and you shall be baruch. And I will barak those that barak you, and I will curse those that curse you, and in you shall all the tribes of the earth be baraked. I think it's important to pause here and understand the context of this. Does it say, I will barak all those that barak the state of Israel? Or does it say, I will barak those that barak Abraham? I think it's important to understand what the context of this verse is saying. Okay, this is not talking about Judaism. This is not talking about the state of Israel. This is talking about the person Abraham. Okay? And Abram went as Yahuwah spoke to him, and Lot departed with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he went out of Haran, or Haran, you would say in the Masoretic. Okay? And Abram took Sarah, his wife, and Lot, the son of his brother, and all their possessions, as many as they had gotten, and every soul which they had gotten in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land of Canaan. And Abram traversed the land lengthwise as far as the place of Shechem to the high oak, and the Canaanites then inhabited the land. And Yahuwah appeared to Abram and said to him, I will give this land to your seed. And Abram built an altar there to Yahuwah, who appeared to him. Okay. All right. And he departed there to the mountain eastward of Bethel, and there he pitched his tent, or you could say sukkah, in Bethel near the sea, and Agai toward the east, and there he built an altar to Yahuwah. So as we see here, there's a human priesthood that's not a Levitical priesthood here, where Abraham can build an altar in a random place. Okay, and called on the name of Yahuwah, and Abram departed and went and encamped in the wilderness. Now, honestly, I want to stop at verse 8 here only because I want to actually go to a verse that a lot of people tend to misinterpret. And that's Exodus 6:3. Okay. And even though in the Septuagint it says he did not manifest his name to them. If you look at the Samaritan Pentateuch, the Targums, even the Masoretic texts, they all agree that it was actually in the form of a question that he actually makes that statement. So it's not that the Septuagint is wrong, it's that this English translator decided to reword it, kind of like how in Revelations chapter 1, instead of the day of the Lord, it has the Lord's day. Okay, so it's kind of like the same thing. It's like basically you're at the mercy of an English translator to translate it the correct way. Unless you have a concordance or a lexicon, you're trusting an English translator to translate it even in the right order of the sentence. So if you reword that last part of the sentence, he's actually asking a question. And he's actually saying, did they not know my name, which we see here, which would agree with Genesis 12, which is what I'm reading here. So Abraham called upon Yahuwah's name. Okay. So let's see here. That was verse 8. All right. And he called on the name of Yahuwah, and Abram departed and went and encamped in the wilderness. And there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, because the famine prevailed in the land. And it came to pass when Abram drew near to enter into Egypt, Abram said to his Sarah, his wife, I know that you are a fair woman. It shall come to pass that when the Egyptians shall see you, they shall say, this is his wife, and they shall slay me, but they shall save you alive. Say, therefore, I am his sister, that it may be well with me on account of you, and my soul shall live because of you. And it came to pass when Abram entered into Egypt, the Egyptians, having seen his wife, that she was very beautiful, that the princes of Pharaoh saw her and praised her to Pharaoh and brought her into the house of Pharaoh. And they treated Abram well on her account. And he had sheep and calves and donkeys and men servants and women servants and mules and camels. And Elohim afflicted Pharaoh with great and severe afflictions and his house because of Sarah, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh, having called Abram, said, what is this you have done to me, that you did not tell me that she was your wife? Wherefore did you say she is my sister? And my bad. And I took her for a wife to myself. And now, behold, your wife is before you. Take her and go quickly away. So we see that at this point in time, not too far removed from the Tower of Babel, you even have pagan nations acting righteously the way Yahuwah's people should be acting. And this man's mad at Abram because he almost went into his wife and he didn't know it. So he's actually very angry at Abram that Abram wasn't honest with him. 19 of Genesis 12.
Okay. Oh, Genesis 12.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm almost.
Your wife is before you, take her and go quickly away. And Pharaoh gave charge to the men according to Abram to join in sending him forward, and his wife and all that he had. So that was Genesis 12. Nothing really to expound upon there. We're going to be moving on here to chapter 13. And Abram went up out of Egypt, and he and his wife and all he had, and Lot with him, into the wilderness. And Abram was very rich in cattle and silver and gold. And he went to the place where he came into the wilderness, as far as Bethel, and as far as the place where his tent was before, between Bethel and Agai. to the place of the altar, which he built there at first. And Abram there called on the name of Yahuwah. So again, second time he calls on Yahuwah's name. And Lot, who went out with Abram, had sheep and oxen and tents, and the land was not large enough for them to live together because their possessions were great, and the land was not large enough for them to live together. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanites and the Perizzites then inhabited the land. Okay. All right. And Abram said to Lot, let there not be a strife between me and you, between my herdmen and your herdmen, for we are brothers. Lo, is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left. And Lot, having lifted up his eyes, observed all the country round about Jordan, that it was all watered before Elohim overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah as the garden of Yahuwah. Interesting. And as the land of Egypt until you come to Zagorah. And Lot chose for himself all the country round Jordan, and Lot went from the east, and they were separated each from his brother. And Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan. Okay. And Lot dwelled in a city of the neighboring people and pitched his tent in Sodom. And the men of Sodom were evil and exceedingly sinful before Elohim. And yeah, we'll get to that part later on in Genesis, how sinful they actually were, and why Jude compares them to the Watchers. Okay. And Elohim said to Abram, after Lot was separated from him, look up with your eyes and behold from the place where you now are northward and southward and eastward, seaward. For all the land which you see, I will give to you and your seed forever. And I will make your seed the dust of the earth. And if anyone is able to number the dust of the earth, then shall your seed be numbered. Arise and traverse the land, both in the length of it and in the breadth. For to you will I give it, and to your seed forever. Okay. And Abram, having removed his tent, came and dwelt by the oak of Mamre, which was in Hebron. And he built an altar to Yahuwah. So now he goes to the oak of Mamre and builds an altar. All right. That was the end of chapter 13. Now we're going to go to 14. Okay, let me just, as we're going here, I want to check to make sure I'm not reading too much here. Okay, so I got to go to 1727. All right, so chapter 14. And it came to pass in the reign of Amraphel, king of Shinar. Now, this is where I wanted to kind of just reference the Targums here and why I like the Targums, okay? Because this seems to be a mystery. Before I knew about this, I used to always think, who is this king of Shinar? Well, 4 chapters earlier, right? Who established Shinar in Genesis 10? Okay, all right. Just was curious to see if you remembered from the other day. All right. Well, the Targum of Jonathan says in the same exact verse, and it was in the days of Amraphel, he is Nimrod, who commanded Abram to be cast into the furnace. He was the king of Ponchos, Arioch, so called. He was Arik tall among the giants, king of Talazar, Chedorlaomer, so called, because he had bound himself or gone over among the bondmen of the king of Elam, crafty as a fox, king of the peoples subjected to him. Okay, so the reason I wanted to read the Targum of Jonathan here, it tells you Amraphel, king of Shinar, is Nimrod. So, Yeah. So Jonathan Ben Uziel gives you a little historical expounding on that verse. Yeah, so, and it shows you that Nimrod's a giant, calls him a giant, actually mighty of the giants. Okay, so, and it came, so we just read here verse 1. Okay, so you have Amraphel, king of Shinar, Ariah, king of Elazar, and Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, or king of the Goyim. Made war with Bala, king of Sodom, Barsa, king of Gomorrah, and with Sinar, king of Adamah, and with Simobor, king of Zobim, and the king of Balak. This is Sagor. All these met with one consent at the Salt Sea, which I believe in the Masoretic, that's known as the Dead Sea. It will probably say in your translation.
So,
Yeah, so the Salt Sea. This is now the Sea of Salt. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and the 13th year they revolted. And it's kind of interesting because we look today now at the occult. The occult like to use 13 as almost bad luck type of thing. It seems like the Bible here is saying that 13 is maybe a number for rebellion, represents rebellion. So it's kind of interesting. Okay, so all right, and in the 14th year, Chedorlaomer came and the kings with him and cut to pieces the giants. So remember, Genesis 10 said Nimrod was a hunter of giants, right? Mm-hmm. So cut to pieces the giants in Ashtaroth and Karnaim and straw nations with them, and the Omeans in the city Save, and the Korhaeans in the mountains of Seir, to the turpentine tree of Paran, which is in the desert. Okay. And having turned back, they came to the well of judgment, that is Kadesh, and they cut in pieces all the princes of the Amalekites and the Amorites dwelling in Asason Thamar. So this is an example. We were talking about this off the record last night, but I think it's good to bring up. This is an example of Yahuwah using someone that is not obedient to him to do his will, like him using evil against evil. He can actually use a wicked person to destroy other wicked people. And we see that with Chedorlaomer, with Tidal, king of nations, and even with Nimrod here. They're destroying the Amorites, the Amalekites. Kind of interesting. And the king of Sodom went out, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Adamah, and the king of Zoibim, and the king of Balak. This is Sagor, and they set themselves in array against them for war in the Salt Valley. Against Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Thargal, king of nations, and Amraphel, king of Shinar, which we already established as Nimrod. Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay. And Ariah, king of Elazar, and the 4 kings against the 5. Now the Salt Sea consists of slime pits. And the king of Sodom fled, and the king of Gomorrah, and they fell in there. And they that were left fled to the mountain country. And they took all the cavalry of Sodom and Gomorrah and all the provisions and departed. And they took also the lot of, let's see here. They took all the cavalry of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions departed. They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, and his baggage, and departed, for he dwelt in Sodom. Okay. And one of them, that he had been rescued, came and told Lot the Hebrew. He dwelt by the oak tree of Mamre, the Amorite, the brother of Eshcol, and the brother of Unari, who were confederates with Abram. And Abram, having heard that Lot, his nephew, had been taken captive, numbered his own homeborn servants 318, and pursued after them to Dan. And he came upon them by night, and he and his servants, and he smote them and pursued them as far as Chobah, which is on the left of Damascus. And he covered all the Calvary of Sodom, and he recovered Lot, his nephew, and all his possessions, and the women and the people, and the king of Sodom went out to meet him after he returned from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer, and the kings with him to the valley of Sabi. This was the plain of the kings. Okay. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth loaves of wine, and he was the priest of the Most High Elohim. And to this day, this is just my opinion, and I think Brother Jeff and the rest of our brothers and sisters would agree. I believe that this was Yahusha pre-incarnate. I know there's different views on this. I actually found out recently the only reason the Targums call him Shem is because after Yahusha came to earth and died and resurrected and all that, Judaism traditionally rendered Melchizedek, king of Salem, as Shem to try to disprove Yahusha. So supposedly it's in their own writings that's really the main reason why they did that. It's probably somewhere in the Talmud it mentions Shem as Melchizedek, and that seems to be the only reason they would name him that. Reason I have for that is because the most literal word for word Targum does not mention Shem as Melchizedek, but only the ones that have rabbinical commentary added into them, like the Targum of Jonathan say Shem. So I think it's safe to say that was a revision by Judaism to disprove Yahusha as being Melchizedek. So anyway, that's why I believe Melchizedek, king of Salem, is Yahusha here. So, and he Baruch Abram and said, Baruch be Abram of the Most High Elohim, who made heaven and earth, and Baruch be the Most High Elohim, who delivered your enemies into your power. And Abram gave him the tithe of all. So here we go. We see Abram giving what it seems to be Yahusha here. He's giving Yahusha pre-incarnate tithes of everything he had. So a tenth of everything he had.
I think you're right.
Yeah. And the king said to Abram, give me the man and take the horses to yourself. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I will stretch out my hand to Yahuwah, the Most High Elohim, who made heaven and earth, that I will not take from all your possessions from a strong string to a shoe latch, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich, except what things the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men that went with me, Eshkol, and Onan, Mamre, these shall take a portion. So we're about to get to chapter 15 here. And after all these things, the word of Yahuwah came to Abraham. Interesting. Wonder if the Targums are a little bit more literal on that. Let's see here. Okay. All right. Okay, the word of Yahuwah came to Abram. I don't think that's just utterance. That is Yahusha himself. The word of Yahuwah came to Abram in a vision, saying, fear not, Abram. I shield you. Your reward shall be very great. Remember, Yahusha says, my reward is with me. Okay. All right. And Abram said, Master, and Yahuwah, what will you... Ooh, this is going to get some people upset here. And Yahuwah, what will you give me? Whereas I am departing without a child. So he's calling the word of Yahuwah here. Mm-hmm. Whereas I am departing without a child, but the son of Masek, my home, born female slave, this Eleazar of Damascus is mine heir. And Abram said, I am grieved since you have given me no seed, but my home-born servant shall succeed me. And immediately there was a voice of Yahuwah to him saying, this shall not be your heir, but he that shall come out of you shall be your heir. And he brought him out and said to him, look up to heaven and count the stars, if you should be able to number them fully. And he said, thus shall your seed be. And Abram believed Elohim, and it was counted to him for righteousness. And he said to him, I am Elohim that brought you out of the land of the Chaldeans, so as to give you this land to inherit. Now, just to note here, I find it interesting. In the Targum of Jonathan, it kind of expounds upon this, which is kind of interesting. It says, the also difference here in verse 6, it says, and he believed in Yahuwah and had belief in the word of Yahuwah, meaning Yahusha, and he reckoned it to him for righteousness, because he parlayed not before him with words. He said to him, so verse 7 of the Targum of Jonathan says, I am Yahuwah who brought you out of the fiery furnace of the Chaldeans to give this land to inherit. So it's kind of interesting. I'm mentioning a fiery furnace there. See here. Okay. Verse 8 here, we're going back to the Septuagint here. And he said, Master and Yahuwah, how shall I know that I shall inherit it? Okay. And he said, okay, so, and he said to him, take for me a heifer in her third year, and a she-goat in her third year, and a ram in his third year, and a dove and a pigeon. So he took for him all these and divided them in the midst and set them opposite to each other, but the birds he did not divide. So interesting. Okay. All right. So let's see here. Okay, hold on. Take me a heifer, she-goat in her third year, and a ram in his third year, and a dove and a pigeon. And so he took him to all these and divided them in the midst and set them opposite to each other, but the birds he did not divide. That seems similar to the Torah there, where you there's a purification sacrifice where, if I'm not mistaken, where you bring the turtle dove. You're not supposed to divide the turtle dove, if I'm not mistaken. So verse 11 here, it says, and the birds came down upon the bodies, even upon the divided parts of them, and Abram sat down by them. What's interesting is it's very possible that this is not referring to actual birds, and this is more of a theory I have, due to the way the Targums render verse 11 here. It says, there came down, meaning swooping down, there came swooping down idolatrous peoples, which are like to unclean birds, to steal away the sacrifices of Yasharal. This is the Targum of Jonathan here. But the righteousness of Abram was a shield over them. So this seems to indicate more of an assumption I have from Revelations 18:2 here, that it's actually referring to fallen angels here, actually doing this. And I'll show you here what I'm referring to in Revelations 18:2. When it's talking about unclean birds in the context of demons or fallen angels. Okay. He cried out with a mighty voice, saying, fallen and fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a refuge for every unclean spirit, and a refuge for every unclean and detestable bird. So the unclean, detestable bird in Revelations 18:2 is in the same statement being compared to unclean spirits and demons. So this is not, this is just my personal opinion. I don't think it was an actual bird that came down. It seems like that extra biblical evidence might be out there for it. And, whether or not you believe it's valid or not, the Apocalypse of Abraham does mention Azazel coming down and trying to stop the sacrifice. So I don't know. That's just a little tidbit I thought I would bring up. But anyway, continuing. Okay, so let's see here. When the sun was going down, Abram fell sound asleep, and behold, a deep and terrifying darkness overwhelmed him. And Yahuwah, let me go back to my Septuagint here. I was reading from the Son of Man Bible before for Revelations. Okay, let's see here. And about sunset, a trance fell upon Abram, and lo, a great gloomy terror falls upon him. And it was said to Abram, you shall surely know that your seed shall be a sojourner in a land not their own, and they shall enslave them and afflict them and humble them 400 years. Mind you, doesn't say 430 years. Okay, 400 years. So, and that's a study we'll do in the future. I'm not going to really touch on that too much right now, but the Masoretic text of Exodus 12:40 contradicts that and says that they're there in Egypt for 430 years, but this prophecy is showing you they're only supposed to be afflicted by Egypt for 400 years. So if you go to the Septuagint of Exodus 12:40, it says the sojournings of the children of Israel in Egypt and the land of Canaan were 430 years, which completely reconciles what we just read here. And it fixes that contradiction. Okay, and the nation whomsoever they shall serve, I will judge, and after this they shall come forth here with much property. But you shall depart to your fathers in peace, nourished in good old age, and in the fourth generation they shall return there, for the sins of the Amorites are not yet filled up even until now. So this kind of reminds me of how Yahuwah is going to wait until the sins of Babylon are all the way reaching up into heaven, and then his wrath comes down. Well, right here in Genesis 15-16, it says the sins of the Amorite are not at full yet. So it's kind of a similar thing here. Okay. And when the sun was about to set, there was a flame, beholding a smoking furnace and lamps of fire, which passed between these divided pieces. In that day, Yahuwah made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your seed I will give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates. Okay, and I'm kind of curious what it says here in verse 18 of the Targum. Okay, all right, yeah. With him, let me just see something real quick, because I know sometimes in the Targums it will say the Yahuwah made a covenant between Abram and the word of Yahuwah sometimes. So let's see here. Okay, just double checking. All right. Really doesn't matter. It's the same person, but the word of Yahuwah and Yahuwah is the same person, but just thought I would double check. All right. Let's see here. Okay. Yep. Oh, before we continue here, I did want to mention in Targum it talks about a prophecy when he falls asleep that I find pretty interesting. Let's see here if I can just read it real quick go back to 13 here. Okay, so in Genesis 15:13, I'll first read from the Targum of Johnson here. It says, starting at verse 12 actually, and when the sun was nearing to set, a deep sleep was thrown into Abram, and behold, 4 kingdoms arose to enslave his children. Terror, which is Babel; darkness, which is Madai; greatness, which is Yavan; decline, which is Pharez, which is to fall and have no uplifting. And from there it is to be that the children of Yashar all will come up. And you might be asking yourselves, well, we know who Babel is, but who's Madai, Yavan, and Pharez? Well, in the Targum of Jerusalem, they give you the English translation of those kingdoms. So in the Targum of Jerusalem, it says you have Babel, which is terror; greatness, that is Media; greatness, that is Greece; and Fel, that is Edom, Rome; that fourth, so Edom, aka Rome with the parentheses here. There's a parentheses for Rome after Edom. That fourth kingdom, which is to fall and never to rise again forever and ever. So I just thought that's interesting to note that the prophecy later on that Daniel is being given, possibly Yahuwah might have given that prophecy, not just to Daniel, but possibly earlier to Abraham. It's very possible. Scripture does say he declares the end from the beginning, meaning Bereshit. So just saying. So anyway. All right. So in the fourth generation, they shall return here for the sin. Okay. All right, here we go. In that day, Yahuwah made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your seed, I will give this land from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates, the Canaanites, the Kenizzites, the Kedmonines, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Raphaim, which is a tribe of giants, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Hivites, and the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. So, other than the Kenites, Kenizzites, and Kedmonians, all the rest of those tribes from verse 20 to 21 are all Nephilim genetic tribes. So just something to keep in mind. So, all right. Genesis 16. And Sarah, the wife of Abraham, bore him no children, and she had an Egyptian maid whose name was Hagar. Okay. And Sarah said to Abram, behold, Yahuwah has restrained me from bearing. So go therefore into my maid, that I may get children for myself through her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarah. Verse 3. So Sarah, wife of Abram, having taken Hagar, the Egyptian, her handmaid, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife to him. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived and saw that she was with child, and her mistress was dishonored before her. Okay. And Sarah said to Abram, I am injured by you. I gave my handmaid into your bosom, and when I saw that she was with child, I was dishonored before her. Yahuwah judge between me and you. Okay. And let's see here. It's interesting to note here when we look at this verse from the Targum in verse 5. I remember something very interesting in this chapter in verse 5 from the Targum. Says here, all right, but now is my affliction. Okay, hold on. Let me see here. Here we go. So Sarah said to Abram, all my affliction is from you, being secure that you would do to me justice. I left the land, the house of my father, and came up here with you to a foreign land. And for as much as I was not able to become a mother, I set free my handmaid and gave her to lie in your bosom. And she sees that she has conceived, and my honor is despised before her. But now is my affliction manifested before Yahuwah, who will spread peace between me and you. And the land shall be replenished from us, and nor shall we need the help of the progeny of Hagar, the daughter of Pharaoh Bar Nimrod. So supposedly the Pharaoh that they just left in Egypt would have been the son of Nimrod. Okay, so basically Hagar, according to the Targum of Jonathan, Hagar is the, I guess you would say, granddaughter of Nimrod, who threw you into the furnace of fire. So something interesting. Something very interesting. Possibly it might have been something historical. So that the Targum of Jonathan puts in there, just something I thought interesting and bring up. Okay, so verse 6. And Abram said to Sarah, behold, your handmaid is in your hands. Use her as it may seem to you. And Sarah afflicted her, and she fled from her face. And an angel of Yahuwah found her by the fountain of water in the wilderness, which if you have a King James Bible, it would say the angel of Yahuwah. So I believe this is Yahusha here. Yeah. found her by the fount of water in the wilderness, by the fount of water by Sur. And the angel of Yahuwah said to Hagar, Sarah's handmaid, where do you come? Where have you came? And where are you going? And she said, I am fleeing from the face of my mistress, Sarah. And the angel of Yahuwah said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hands. And the angel of Yahuwah said to her, I will surely multiply your seed, and it shall not be numbered for a multitude. And the angel of Yahuwah said to her, behold, you are with child, and shall bear a son, and shall call his name Ishmael, for Yahuwah has hearkened to your humiliation. He shall be a wild man, his hands against all, and hands of all against him, and he shall dwell. Oh my goodness, people, calm down. All right. He shall be a wild man in his hands against all, and hands all against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of his brothers. And she called the name of Yahuwah Elohim, who spoke to her. So notice verse 13 here is saying that Yahuwah Elohim spoke to her, but the angel of Yahuwah spoke to her in verses 11 and 12. That's very interesting right there. Therefore she called the well of him who I have openly seen. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. What's interesting here is that doesn't the New Testament say no man has seen the Father, right? Okay, but the only begotten who is in the bosom of the Father. Okay. And Hagar bore a son to Abraham. Abraham called the name of his son, which Hagar bore to him, Ishmael. And Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. Okay. And we're about to get to the last chapter of the Genesis portion here. All right. I just kind of want to see something real quick because I remember seeing something where it's a little bit more literal in that last verse of chapter 16 for the angel of Yahuwah. Yeah, right here. In the Targum of Unkelos in Genesis 16:14, it says, therefore she called the name of the well at which appeared the angel of the covenant. Behold, is between Rechem and Hagarah. So if you know about the book of Malachi, there's a verse that talks about, behold, he is coming, the angel of the covenant. Okay, so that's obviously referring to Yahusha. Yeah, so, yeah, and let me see here. I want to see, there's another connection in verse 13 before we move on to the last chapter of Genesis that we're doing. Let's see here. Here we go. The Targum of Jonathan in verse 13 of chapter 16 of Genesis says, and she gave thanks before Yahuwah, whose word spoke to her, and thus said, you are he who lives and are eternal, who sees but are not seen. For she said, for behold, here is revealed the esteem of the majesty of Yahuwah after a vision. Wherefore she called the well at which the living and eternal one was revealed. And behold, it is situated between Rechem and Chalutza. All right, we got a couple people in the waiting room here, so let me just fix that. And we're going to go into Genesis 17. Yep, go ahead, Gibsons. I see you had your hand up.
So the Muslims claim their Abrahamic lineage goes through Ishmael, the handmaiden's son. And so that's just neither here nor there, but just interesting. And the Genesis 13, when we're talking about the bigger picture of the marriage of Israel and the promises given to Abraham, if Mount Sinai is where the wedding vows are exchanged, then Genesis 13 is where Yahuwah comes to Abraham and asks, he's basically approaching his soon-to-be wife and asks to marry. And he says, I have prepared a place for you, and I want to make a family with you, right? And if we're looking at it on the bigger picture of it being a marriage, then what we just saw was the what do you call it? Like the proposal, if you will, to Israel, because Abraham would become Israel, you know. And it's as though he's like wooing her in the wilderness right now. Israel, not Abraham.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great connection there. So yeah, Sister Sadia just joined us, and Sister Sadia, I noticed your granddaughter Alyssa was trying to get in before. I was just not able to admit her, so just tell her to try again. I'll be able to admit her now. It's just that I was reading before, so okay. All right, so let me go back here to the scripture. Now we're going to read Genesis 17, and I'm going to stop at verse 27. I think that should be the last verse of the chapter. Yes, so that's the whole chapter. Genesis 17, and Abram was 99 years old, and Yahuwah appeared to Abram and said to him, I am your Elohim. Be well-pleasing before me and be blameless. So what I find interesting is that he's telling him to do something that Enoch before him did, according to Genesis 5:24. Said, Enoch was well-pleasing to him. And I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. So verse 2 says, I will multiply you exceedingly. I will make my covenant between me and you. Okay, so let me just see real quick. Let's see here. Why is this thing taking forever? Okay. See here. And I will set, this is why I wanted to check between the Targums and the Septuagint here. Because the Targum here of Jonathan says, I will set my covenant between my word and you. So his word and Abraham. And Abram fell upon his face, and Elohim spoke to him, saying, and I behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of a multitude of nations, which actually connects with Ephraim in a way, because Ephraim has a multitude of ethnoses coming from his loins in Genesis. I believe it's Genesis 48, if I'm not mistaken, 48:19. Okay, so we have a connection between Abraham and Manasseh, which is kind of interesting. Let me see if I can find that real quick here. Okay. Yeah, here we go. Genesis 48:19. And it's the same Greek word there as multitude. That's the reason I'm bringing this up. And he would not, but said, I know it, my son. I know it. He also shall be a people, and he shall be exalted, but his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. So what's interesting is you have two brothers in this part of Genesis later on that it's kind of likened to Isaac and Ishmael here. I'm noticing a similarity between Ephraim, who is to become a multitude of nations, and Abraham here with Isaac and his actual seed being counted to Isaac as a multitude of nations. So anyway, and your name shall no more be called Abram, but shall be called Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations, and I will increase you very exceedingly, and I will make a nations of these, and kings shall come out of you. And I will establish my covenant between you and your seed after you, to their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be your Elohim and the Elohim of your seed after you. Okay. All right, let's just check to see what it says here. And again, instead of it says between Yahuwah and Abraham, it says, I have established my covenant between my word and you, and your sons after you in their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be an Elohim to you and your sons after you. So if Yahuwah's word is not Yahuwah, then we have a problem, because then we have a different husband, a different person that is actually covenanted with Abraham's seed after him, which would become Israel. Okay, so the only way to reconcile this is that his word and Yahuwah are are the same person. Okay. Verse 8, and I will give to you and to your seed after you the land wherein you sojourn, even all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be to them a Elohim. Okay. And another interesting thing about the Targums here is instead of plural, it's singular. It actually says, I will be to them Aloha. Interesting. Okay. And I will give to you to your seed after you. Okay, we just read that. All right, verse 9. And Elohim said to Abraham, you also shall fully keep my covenant, you and your seed after you for their generations. And this is the covenant which you shall fully keep between me and you and between your seed after you for their generations. Every male of you shall be circumcised. Okay? And obviously that covenant of circumcision was carried over into the Levitical priesthood and even the covenant of Mount Sinai, so it wasn't left behind just because there was different covenants. Okay, circumcision is still valid. Okay, and you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be for a sign of a covenant between me and you. And the child of 8 days old shall be circumcised by you, every male throughout your generations, and the servant born in the house, and he that is bought with money, of every son of a stranger who is not of your seed. So circumcision is not for just the Hebrews. Okay. All right. It actually says those that are of a stranger that you've bought with your own money. That's a home servant. So that would be a sojourner that becomes one with Israel. Okay. He that is born in your house and he that is bought with money shall be surely circumcised, and my covenant shall be on your flesh for an everlasting covenant, meaning eternal, forever. And the uncircumcised male who shall not be circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin on the 8th day, that soul shall be utterly destroyed from its family, for he has broken my covenant. And Elohim said to Abraham, Sarah, your wife, her name shall not be called Sarah. Sarah shall be her name. And I will barak her and give her, a son of her, and I will barak him, and he shall become nations, and kings of nations shall be of him. And Abraham fell upon his face and laughed and spoke in his heart, saying, shall there be a child to one who is 100 years old, and shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear? And Abraham said to Elohim, let this Ishmael live before you. And Elohim said to Abram, yea, behold, Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant to be a Elohim to him and to his seed after him. Okay, so that's verse 19 there. Okay. Okay. All right. All right. Verse, let's see. So we are at, okay, verse 20 now. All right. And concerning Ishmael, behold, I have heard you, and behold, I have Baruch him, and will increase him and multiply him exceedingly. 12 nations shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. But I will establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this time in the next year. And he left off speaking with him, and Elohim went up from Abraham. And Abraham took Ishmael his son, and all his homeborn servants, and all those bought with money, and every male of the men in the house of Abraham, and he circumcised their foreskins in the time of that day, according as Elohim spoke to him. And Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. So this shows, and this is a proof right here in Genesis that circumcision is not the first thing when you believe in Messiah, because
Right.
I mean, Yahuwah didn't tell Abraham to get circumcised until he was almost 100. Okay.
Mhm.
And Ishmael, his son, was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. Okay. And at the period of that day, Abraham was circumcised, and Ishmael, his son, and all the men of his house, both those born in the house and those bought with the money of foreign nations. Interesting. Okay. So that's the end of our Genesis portion for today. I'm going to see how everyone's doing here. If we need to take a break, we can take a break. But my mom was going to be reading the Isaiah portion right after me. So I'm just going to see how everyone's doing right now, if we need to take a break or not. Yep, go ahead, Gibsons. I saw your hands up.
I got a little nugget for you. Sarah and Abraham both having the letter H put in their name. So the letter H in Paleo is symbolic of the spirit, right? It means behold, but it also means spirit. And so they literally had the spirit placed in them in their name by just adding the letter H to the way their name is spelled. So
Neat.
isn't that nifty?
That's awesome. I didn't know the hay was that's interesting. I didn't know.
Means spirit, ruach, spirit. And Abraham means father, lifted, high father. And then later he's like, now you're that, but with my spirit in you, you know?
Okay. All right. Cool.
Isn't it like?
Yep, go ahead, sis. Well, what were you going to say? Go ahead, Sister Sadia.
So anyways, that was his grandma calling me. I'll call her right back. So it's the Yod Hey Wah Hey. So the Hey is in Yahuwah's name as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the Ruach. Yeah. So
it has multiple meanings to H.
yeah.
Wow.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good, brother. I never thought of it like that.
So we're going to take a short intermission, everyone that's listening in from YouTube Live and everything. We're going to take a little break. I think my mom needs to get something to eat or something. So shortly after, we'll be going on and doing Isaiah. Let's see what we have here. We got, please stay tuned. We're going to be doing Isaiah 40:27 to 41:16. My mom will be reading that, so please stay tuned, everyone. We'll be right back. This is the end of this portion of our YouTube Live, so stay tuned. YouTube will be